In the spring of 1878, a bloodied young woman was found wandering the outskirts of Willow Creek, Colorado. She remembered nothing, not her name, not her past, not how she ended up miles from civilization, with wounds that suggested she'd survived something terrible. The only clue to her identity was a silver locket around her neck, containing a photograph and an inscription that would eventually reveal a truth darker than anyone in the small frontier town could have imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This is the story of the aftermath of what would come to be known as the Blackwater Ridge Massacre, and the woman who carried its terrible secret without even knowing it. The sun was just beginning to crest over the jagged edges of the Rockies when Sheriff Thomas Harmon received word from one of the local trappers about a strange discovery. The man had been checking his lines near Blackwater Ridge when he spotted her. A young woman, no older than 25, stumbling through the tall grass in a tattered dress caked with dried blood. Her golden hair was matted, her feet bare and lacerated from the rocky terrain. When the trapper approached, he said her eyes held no recognition, no fear, just emptiness. "Found her like that, Sheriff?" The trapper, Eli Jenkins, explained as they stood outside the town doctor's home. "Didn't say a word the whole ride back, just kept fiddling with that locket around her neck." Sheriff Harmon removed his hat, running a weathered hand through his salt and pepper hair. At 48, he'd seen his share of tragedies in this unforgiving territory. Bandits, disease, harsh winters, they all took their toll. But something about this situation made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. "You did the right thing bringing her here, Eli," he said. "Doc Wilson's the best we've got." Inside the modest two-story home that doubled as Dr. Samuel Wilson's practice, the mysterious woman sat perched on the edge of an examination table. Her eyes, a striking shade of blue, darted around the room, taking in her surroundings with a mixture of confusion and wariness. The blood on her dress had been cleaned away, revealing that most of it wasn't hers. She had a gash above her right eyebrow and bruising along her arms, but nothing life-threatening. "Physically, she'll recover," Doc Wilson said, his voice low, as he spoke to the sheriff in the hallway. "But her mind, that's another matter. Complete amnesia from what I can tell. Trauma can do that to a person." Sheriff Harmon nodded grimly. "Any identification, papers, anything that might tell us who she is or where she came from?" "Just this." Doc Wilson handed the sheriff a silver locket. It was an ornate piece, clearly valuable, with intricate engravings of ivy leaves around its edges. She wouldn't let go of it at first, had to wait till she dozed off to get a proper look. Sheriff Harmon clicked it open. Inside was a small daguerreotype of a stern-looking man in his 40s, well-dressed in the fashion of the wealthy. On the opposite side was an inscription, "To my Elizabeth, forever bound. R.M." "R.M.," the sheriff muttered. "Not much to go on." "There's more," Doc Wilson said. "The state of her hands, they're soft, no calluses. This isn't a woman who's done manual labor. And her dress beneath the dirt and blood, it's fine material, expensive." Sheriff Harmon pocketed the locket. "So we've got a wealthy young woman, possibly named Elizabeth, wandering wounded through the wilderness with no memory and no explanation. And no one's reported anyone missing matching her description," Doc Wilson added. "Not yet," Sheriff Harmon corrected. "I'll send telegrams to the neighboring towns. Someone's bound to be looking for her." What the sheriff didn't say was what troubled him most: the blood. If most of it wasn't hers, then whose was it? And what had happened to leave her the sole survivor? 2 days passed, and the town of Willow Creek buzzed with speculation about the mysterious young woman staying at Mrs. Abigail Palmer's boarding house. Mrs. Palmer, a widow who had lost her husband to tuberculosis 3 years prior, had taken an immediate liking to the girl she'd begun calling Beth, short for Elizabeth, based on the locket's inscription. Poor thing doesn't remember a lick of her past, Mrs. Palmer told anyone who would listen, usually while shopping at Donovan's general store or after Sunday service. But she's got refined manners, holds her teacup just so, speaks like she's had schooling back east. What Mrs. Palmer didn't share was how the young woman screamed in her sleep. Terrible, throat-tearing screams that woke the other boarders and left Beth shaking and covered in sweat, clutching her locket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. On the third day, Sheriff Harmon received a response to one of his telegrams. It had come from Denver, and the contents made his stomach drop. Possible match to your description. Stop. Elizabeth Montgomery, daughter of Richard Montgomery. Stop traveling. With father and others on wagon train to Silverton. Stop expected arrival 2 weeks ago. Stop no contact. Since departure, stop send confirmation immediately. Stop Richard Montgomery, R.M. It fits. The sheriff crumpled the telegram in his fist. He'd heard rumors of a wagon train that had gone missing. The usual assumption was Indians, but there had been no raids reported in the area. If this Elizabeth was the same woman, and she was the only survivor, he needed to find that wagon train. I'm coming with you, the woman called Beth insisted, her delicate hands balled into fists at her sides. Sheriff Harmon shook his head as he saddled his horse. Ma'am, with all due respect, you're still recovering. And if what we find is what I fear, it's not something you should see. I need to know, she said, her voice soft but firm. These nightmares, they're pieces of something terrible. I can feel it. Maybe it will help me remember. The sheriff looked to Doc Wilson, who stood nearby with a concerned expression. It could trigger her memory, the doctor admitted reluctantly, or it could make things worse. Beth's blue eyes flashed with determination. It's my past, gentlemen, my life. I have a right to it, even the ugly parts. There was something in her tone, a hint of the woman she had been before, perhaps. Someone used to be listened to, someone of means and education. Sheriff Harmon sighed. We leave in an hour, dress warmly and prepare for a hard ride. The search party consisted of Sheriff Harmon, Deputy Mark Fletcher, Doc Wilson, and Beth. They followed Eli Jenkins' directions to where he had found her, then began tracking backward. Beth rode side saddle on a gentle mare borrowed from Mrs. Palmer, her posture perfect even after hours in the saddle, another clue to her previous life. They found the site near dusk, in a narrow pass between two ridges. From a distance, the overturned wagons looked like massive, broken-backed beasts slumped against the landscape. As they drew closer, the crows scattered, their raucous cries the only sound in the eerie silence. Stay back, Sheriff Harmon ordered. But Beth had already dismounted, moving forward as if in a trance. What remained told a grim story. 3 wagons, their canvas coverings shredded and stained dark with blood. Personal belongings scattered across the ground, books, clothing, a child's wooden horse, a woman's bonnet, and the bodies hastily buried in shallow graves by whoever had done this, their boots and hands still visible through the thin layer of dirt. These weren't Indians, Deputy Fletcher said, examining one of the wagons. Look at the shot patterns. And the goods weren't taken. Money, watches, even food, all still here. Sheriff Harmon nodded grimly. Ambush, professional. They weren't after goods. Then what were they after? Doc Wilson asked. The sheriff's eyes drifted to Beth, who stood motionless before one of the graves. I suspect we're looking at her. As the men excavated the makeshift graves to identify the victims, Beth wandered through the wreckage, touching objects with a tentative hand. A silver hairbrush, a leather-bound book of poetry, a man's pocket watch, its face shattered. When she reached the third wagon, something changed in her expression. She climbed inside carefully, navigating the tilted floor with surprising ease. Moments later, she emerged holding a small cedar box. This is mine, she said with certainty, though her brow furrowed with the effort of remembering. I kept my letters in it. Sheriff Harmon approached her cautiously. "May I?" She handed him the box, which he opened to find several folded letters, addressed to Miss Elizabeth Montgomery from various acquaintances in Boston. The most recent was a wedding invitation, dated 2 months earlier. "Mr. and Mrs. Harold Williams request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their daughter Amelia to Mr. Richard Montgomery." "Richard Montgomery," Sheriff Harmon read. Aloud, "That's R.M., the man in your locket, not your sweetheart, but your father." Beth's hand went to the locket around her neck, her fingers tracing its outline through the fabric of her borrowed dress. "Then who is Elizabeth? If I'm her, why doesn't any of this feel familiar?" Before the sheriff could answer, Deputy Fletcher called out from one of the graves, "Sheriff, you'd better see this." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the largest of the graves lay the body of a man in his 40s, his fine suit now dirt-stained and torn. Even in death, his face retained a haughty expression. Beside him was a younger man, barely out of his teens, with similar features. "Richard Montgomery and his son, I'd wager," Sheriff Harmon said, looking at the daguerreotype from the locket for confirmation. "The boy isn't mentioned in the telegram." "That's not all." Deputy Fletcher pointed to 3 other graves. 2 guards, based on their attire, and a woman, young, blonde, wearing what's left of a blue traveling dress. Beth stepped forward, her face pale. "Let me see her." "I don't think that's wise," Doc Wilson began, but Beth pushed past him. The woman in the grave had been beautiful once. Now, with half her face gone from what appeared to be a shotgun blast, she was barely recognizable. Yet what remained showed features similar to Beth's, the same delicate nose, the same chin. "She's wearing a wedding ring," Beth observed, her voice strangely calm. New by the look of it. Sheriff Harmon knelt beside the grave, examining the woman's left hand. Indeed, a gold band encircled her 4th finger. He carefully removed it, reading the inscription inside. "To my Elizabeth, forever bound." JD, not RM. Beth's breathing quickened, but the locket. It says, "To my Elizabeth, from RM." Sheriff Harmon stood slowly, putting the pieces together. "RM is Richard Montgomery, your father, and this woman is Elizabeth Montgomery. Given the wedding ring, I'd say newly married Elizabeth Montgomery. But if she's Elizabeth, then who am I?" Beth whispered, her hands trembling. The sheriff looked at her thoughtfully. "That's what we need to find out. And why would someone ambush a wagon train, kill everyone including Elizabeth Montgomery, but leave you alive with her locket?" As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the massacre site, Beth stood among the ruins of what should have been her memory, clutching a locket that belonged to a dead woman with her name. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely, haunting sound that seemed to echo the emptiness inside her. They made camp a short distance from the massacre site, none of them willing to sleep among the graves. Doc Wilson gave Beth a sedative to help her rest, but she refused it, choosing instead to sit by the fire, the cedar box of letters in her lap. "I should feel something," she said to Sheriff Harmon as he handed her a cup of coffee. "If these people were my family, I would feel grief. But I look at them and feel nothing, just a hollow space where memories should be." The sheriff settled beside her, his weathered face thoughtful in the firelight. "Memory's a strange thing. Sometimes the mind protects itself by forgetting." "What happened here wasn't an ordinary robbery," Beth said. "The deputy was right. Valuables were left behind. And this..." She touched the locket. "Why would someone place a dead woman's locket around my neck? It's as if..." She trailed off, her eyes widening with a terrible realization. "As if someone wanted you to be found as Elizabeth Montgomery," Sheriff Harmon finished for her. Beth nodded slowly. "But why, and who am I really?" The sheriff had no answers, only more questions. Who would benefit from having this young woman believe she was Elizabeth Montgomery, and what role had she played in the massacre? Victim, witness, or something else entirely? As Beth finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, Sheriff Harmon made a decision. The telegram he'd sent in the morning wouldn't confirm Elizabeth Montgomery's survival. Instead, it would request information on anyone associated with the Montgomerys, business partners, rivals, servants. Someone had orchestrated this bloody deception, and the truth lay buried somewhere in the past of a family he suspected had secrets worth killing for. What he didn't know was that the most dangerous secret of all was sleeping just a few feet away, her hand curled protectively around a locket that told a lie with every beat of her heart. The journey back to Willow Creek was somber. They brought the bodies with them, wrapped in canvas from the ruined wagons, loaded onto a hastily constructed travois. Beth, or whoever she truly was, rode in silence, the cedar box of letters clutched to her chest like a shield. Sheriff Harmon had sent Deputy Fletcher ahead with telegrams to Denver, Boston, and San Francisco, seeking any information on the Montgomery family, their business dealings, and potential enemies. The deputy was also instructed to keep the discovery quiet. If someone had gone to such lengths to stage this deception, news of their failure might provoke further violence. When they reached Willow Creek, Doc Wilson insisted Beth stay at his home rather than the boarding house. "Too many curious ears at Mrs. Palmer's," he explained, "and you need rest, medical supervision." Beth didn't argue. The shock of the massacre site had left her withdrawn, her blue eyes clouded with confusion and fear. She moved like a sleepwalker, obeying instructions without protest. That evening, while Beth slept under the influence of laudanum, Sheriff Harmon and Doc Wilson examined the contents of the cedar box in the doctor's study. "These letters go back nearly 2 years," the sheriff said, carefully unfolding one dated June 1876, correspondence between Elizabeth Montgomery and various friends in Boston society. Nothing unusual on the surface. Doc Wilson sipped his whiskey, frowning. "What about family connections, business associates?" "There's mention of her father's mining interests. Seems Montgomery owned several silver mines near Silverton. Was moving west to oversee operations directly." The sheriff set the letter aside, picking up another. "This one mentions an engagement. Not to a J.D., though, someone named Charles Prescott. So Elizabeth was engaged to this Prescott fellow, then ended. Up married to J.D. instead." Doc Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Could be relevant." Sheriff Harmon nodded absently, his attention caught by a small, folded paper tucked into the lining of the box. Unlike the other letters, this one wasn't addressed or signed. It contained just a single line of neat, precise handwriting. "Remember, your promise. The 15th of July, come alone." "July 15th, Sheriff Harmon muttered. "That's 2 days from now." Before Doc Wilson could respond, a scream tore through the quiet house. They rushed to the guest room to find Beth thrashing in her bed, her eyes wide open but unseeing, locked in some terrible vision. "No, not her, please. I didn't agree to this," she cried, her arms raised as if warding off blows. Doc Wilson grabbed her shoulders. "Beth, wake up!" Her eyes cleared slowly, focusing on the doctor's concerned face. Sweat plastered her golden hair to her forehead, and her breathing came in ragged gasps. "I remembered something," she whispered. "A room. Dark wood. Paneling. A man shouting. I couldn't see his face, but his signet ring caught the light when he slammed his fist on the desk." "What else?" Sheriff Harmon pressed. "What was he shouting about?" Beth shook her head, wincing. "It's gone now. Just fragments. But I felt afraid. Not for myself. For someone else." The sheriff exchanged glances with Doc Wilson. "Get some rest," he told Beth. "Tomorrow, we're going to try something that might help your memory." After she had calmed and drifted back to sleep, the sheriff showed Doc Wilson the note. "Whatever's supposed to happen on the 15th, I've got a feeling it's connected to all. of this, and if someone's expecting to meet Elizabeth Montgomery, or who they think is Elizabeth Montgomery, we need to be ready. The next morning, Sheriff Harmon took Beth to his office, where he'd arranged a collection of items salvaged from the massacre site on his desk. The pocket watch with the shattered face, a silver-tipped walking cane, a woman's ivory hairpin, a leather portfolio filled with mining contracts and maps. "I want you to touch each item," he instructed. "See if anything triggers a memory, no matter how small." Beth approached the desk hesitantly, her fingers hovering over the objects. What if I remember something terrible? What if I was part of this somehow? The sheriff's expression remained neutral. "Then we'll deal with it, but my gut tells me you're as much a victim in this as the others." She began with the pocket watch, turning it over in her palm. Nothing. The walking cane. Still nothing. When she reached for the hairpin, her hand trembled slightly, but no memories surfaced. Then she opened the leather portfolio. "This handwriting," she said suddenly, pointing to notes scribbled in the margins of one contract. "I recognize it." "From where?" Sheriff Harmon asked, leaning forward. Beth frowned, concentrating. "I don't know, but it's familiar, like I've seen it many times before." The sheriff made a note. "The contracts are signed by Richard Montgomery. If you recognize his handwriting but not his face from the locket." "What does that mean?" Beth asked. "Could mean a lot of things. Maybe you worked for him. A secretary, perhaps, someone who would see his writing but not necessarily be close to the family." Beth considered this, then continued through the portfolio. Near the back was a map of land holdings near Silverton, with several areas circled in red ink. At the sight of it, she gasped, pressing a hand to her temple. "The map," she whispered. "I've seen it before, in that same room from my dream." The man with the signet ring was pointing at it, arguing with someone. Sheriff Harmon carefully placed the map on top of the pile. "Progress," he said with satisfaction. "Slow, but it's there. Your memories aren't completely gone, just buried." As they continued the exercise, Deputy Fletcher burst into the office, waving a telegram. "Just came in from Boston," he announced, handing it to the sheriff. "You're going to want to read this right away." Sheriff Harmon scanned the message, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Richard Montgomery involved in disputed mining claim. Stop lawsuit filed by James Daniels of Colorado Territory. Stop Montgomery daughter Elizabeth. Recently broke engagement. To Charles Prescott. Stop married James Daniels in secret ceremony last month. Stop family disowned her. Stop Montgomery traveling west to secure claims before court. Ruling stop James Daniels." Sheriff Harmon read aloud. "J.D. Elizabeth's husband," Beth said quietly. "The man who gave her the wedding ring." The sheriff nodded. "And a man with a serious grudge against Richard Montgomery. A mining dispute valuable enough to kill for." "You think James Daniels ambushed the wagon train?" Deputy Fletcher asked. "Killed his own wife? Or hired someone to do it?" Sheriff Harmon replied. "Though it doesn't explain—" He gestured to Beth. "It doesn't explain to me," she finished for him, "or why I was left alive with Elizabeth's locket." The sheriff folded the telegram thoughtfully. "No, it doesn't. But it gives us somewhere to start. Deputy, I need you to send another wire to Denver. Find out everything you can about James Daniels, and see if anyone matching Beth's description has been reported missing." After the deputy left, Sheriff Harmon turned to Beth. "The note we found, July 15th, tomorrow. It could be nothing, or it could be everything." Beth interrupted, a new determination in her voice. "If someone is expecting to meet Elizabeth Montgomery tomorrow, we should be there." "We don't know where there is," the sheriff pointed out. The note didn't specify a location. Beth returned to the desk, scanning the items again before picking up the map. "What if it's here?" She pointed to one of the areas circled in red. "This spot near Silverton. It's marked differently than the others." Sheriff Harmon examined the map more closely. The area she indicated was indeed marked with a double circle and what appeared to be a small X in the corner. "It's a day's hard." "Ride," he said, calculating. "We'd have to leave immediately." Beth's eyes flashed with that same determination he'd glimpsed before. "Then let's go." They departed Willow Creek within the hour, accompanied by Deputy Fletcher and two trusted local men deputized for the journey. Beth had changed into men's clothing borrowed from Doc Wilson's son, a practical decision for the hard ride ahead, though it drew scandalized looks from Mrs. Palmer as they passed the boarding house. The route took them through increasingly rugged terrain, following game trails and narrow passes that tested both horses and riders. Beth rode with surprising skill, another piece of the puzzle that was her true identity. "You've spent time in the saddle before," Sheriff Harmon observed as they stopped to rest the horses near a mountain stream. Beth nodded, dismounting with fluid grace. "Apparently so. Another thing my body remembers that my mind doesn't." They made camp as night fell, in a sheltered canyon that offered protection from the wind and any watching eyes. Around the campfire, Sheriff Harmon shared his plan for the following day. "We'll approach the meeting point before dawn, scope the terrain. Deputy Fletcher and I will accompany Beth. The rest of you will position yourselves as lookouts." He turned to Beth. "You'll have to play the part of Elizabeth Montgomery. Whoever's expecting her might bolt if they see you with law enforcement." Beth stared into the fire, her expression troubled. "And if it's a trap? If it's the same person who orchestrated the massacre? That's why we'll be close by," Deputy Fletcher assured her. "No one's going to hurt you." But the sheriff saw the doubt in her eyes. They were asking her to confront a part of her past that might be better left buried, a past that had already led to multiple deaths. Later, when the others had turned in for the night, Beth approached Sheriff Harmon as he kept watch. "Can I ask you something?" she said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the mountain chill. "Of course. What if I was part of this? What if I'm not a victim, but an accomplice?" Her voice trembled slightly. "What if I helped? Plan what happened to those people." Sheriff Harmon considered her for a long moment. "Do you believe that's possible?" "I don't know what's possible anymore," she admitted. "But these fragments of memories, they don't feel like the memories of someone innocent." "Guilt doesn't always mean culpability," the sheriff said gently. "Sometimes we feel responsible for things beyond our control." Beth looked up at the vast canopy of stars above them. "Tomorrow I might learn who I really am. I'm not sure I'm ready for that truth." "Few of us are ever ready for the truth," Sheriff Harmon replied. "But living a lie is its own kind of prison." Dawn broke clear and cold over the mountains. They reached the marked location on the map by mid-morning, a small clearing beside a rushing stream, with an abandoned miner's cabin on its edge. The cabin's roof had partially collapsed, but its stone walls stood firm against the elements. "Perfect spot for a clandestine meeting," Deputy Fletcher muttered as they surveyed the area from a nearby ridge. "Isolated, hard to approach without being seen, multiple escape routes." Sheriff Harmon nodded. "Beth, you'll wait inside the cabin. We'll be within earshot, hidden among those rocks." Beth had spent the morning mentally preparing herself, rehearsing what little she knew of Elizabeth Montgomery based on the letters. Now dressed once again in a simple dress borrowed from Mrs. Palmer's collection, her golden hair pinned up in a style similar to the dead woman's, she looked every bit the Boston socialite fallen on hard times. "Remember," Sheriff Harmon instructed, as they approached the cabin, "don't volunteer information. Let them do the talking. We need to understand what they think your role is in all this." Beth nodded, her face pale but resolved. "And if it turns dangerous? First sign of trouble, we move in." The interior of the cabin was sparse, a rough wooden table, a single chair, the remnants of a bed frame. Beth positioned herself by the single window, where the light caught the silver locket around her neck. Then she waited. Noon came and went. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent. Sheriff Harmon, hidden among the rocks with Deputy Fletcher, was beginning to think they'd misinterpreted the note when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them freeze. A single rider emerged from the trees, a woman, middle-aged, wearing practical riding clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face. She dismounted gracefully, tethering her horse to a post before approaching the cabin. Beth straightened, taking a deep breath as the cabin door creaked open. The woman who stepped inside removed her hat, revealing graying auburn hair twisted into a practical bun. Her face, lined with age and sun, registered shock at the sight of Beth. "My God," she breathed. "They told me you survived, but I hardly believed it." Beth hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I'm afraid I don't remember you. The doctor says I have amnesia from the incident." The woman's expression shifted from shock to concern. "Nothing at all? You don't remember who I am?" Beth shook her head apologetically. "I'm Margaret Winters," the woman said, taking a step closer. "I was your father's housekeeper in Boston for 15 years. And your confidant after your mother passed." "My father," Beth repeated carefully. "Richard Montgomery." Margaret's brow furrowed. "No, dear. Edward Daniels, James's father." Beth felt the room tilt slightly. "James Daniels? Elizabeth Montgomery's husband?" "Elizabeth Margaret broke off, her eyes widening as understanding dawned. "Oh my God, you don't know. You truly don't remember." She reached for Beth's hands, grasping them tightly. "Your name is Sarah Daniels. You're James's sister." The revelation hit Beth, now Sarah, like a physical blow. She sank into the cabin's lone chair, struggling to process this new information. "James's sister," she repeated numbly. "But the locket—" Margaret's face darkened. "That's Elizabeth's. Yes, you must have taken it after what happened." "After what happened?" Sarah echoed, a chill running through her. "The massacre. Did I—" She couldn't finish the question. Margaret knelt beside her, still holding her hands. "Listen to me carefully, Sarah. Your brother James married Elizabeth Montgomery against her father's wishes. Richard Montgomery was trying to cheat your family out of rightful mining claims your father discovered before he died last year. The marriage was meant to force a resolution, but Montgomery wouldn't budge. So James arranged the ambush," Sarah whispered, the pieces falling into place. "He killed them all, his own wife included." Margaret's grip tightened painfully. You can't remember any of it? The plan? Your role?" Sarah shook her head, her instincts suddenly screaming danger. "This woman knew too much, was pressing too hard. I only know what I've been told," she said carefully, "that I was found wandering, injured with no memory." Margaret released her hands, standing abruptly. "Then perhaps it's better that way. Some things are best forgotten." She moved toward the door, then paused. "I should warn you, though. James knows you survived. He knows you're in Willow Creek, and he's coming for you." Before Sarah could respond, the cabin door burst open, Sheriff Harmon filling the frame with his revolver drawn. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from her," he said, his voice deadly calm. Margaret froze, then slowly raised her hands. "Sheriff, this isn't what it appears. I'm simply delivering a message." "We heard enough," Deputy Fletcher said, entering behind the sheriff. "You just admitted knowledge of a premeditated massacre. That makes you an accessory." "And you just warned the only witness that the murderer is coming for her," Sheriff Harmon added. "That sounds an awful lot like a threat." Margaret's composure cracked, fear flashing across her face. "You don't understand. James Daniels isn't a man to be crossed. If he discovers I've been arrested, then he'll have to deal with me." The sheriff interrupted. "Deputy, escort Mrs. Winters to her horse. We're taking her back to Willow Creek. She's got a cell waiting with her name on it." As Deputy Fletcher led the protesting woman outside, Sheriff Harmon turned to Sarah, whose face had gone ashen. "Sarah Daniels," she said softly, testing the name on her tongue. James's sister. I helped him plan the murders, didn't I? That's why I feel this guilt. Sheriff Harmon holstered his revolver. We don't know that yet. What we do know is that James Daniels orchestrated the massacre, and his housekeeper just confirmed it. She also confirmed he's looking for you. But why? Sarah asked, clutching the locket, Elizabeth's locket, around her neck. If I helped him, why would he want to find me? The sheriff's expression was grim. Maybe you didn't play your part as expected. Maybe you tried to save Elizabeth, or maybe... He hesitated. Maybe what? Maybe you're the only loose end that could connect him to the murders. As they prepared to leave, Sarah paused at the cabin door, looking back at the dusty interior where her true identity had finally begun to take shape. Sarah Daniels, she murmured, sister to a murderer. Sheriff Harmon placed a steady hand on her shoulder. We don't choose our blood, Miss Daniels, but we do choose our actions. And somewhere inside you, there's a woman who chose to survive. Let's find out why. The journey back to Willow Creek was tense, with Margaret Winters riding. Under Deputy Fletcher's watchful eye, Sarah, still adjusting to her newly discovered identity, kept her distance from the housekeeper, trying to reconcile the fragments of her returning memory with the woman's revelations. She's lying about something, Sarah told Sheriff Harmon, as they made camp that evening, well out of Margaret's earshot. I can feel it. The way she looked at me. There's more she isn't saying. The sheriff nodded thoughtfully. People like that rarely tell the whole truth at once. They parcel it out, see which pieces serve their purpose. He stoked the campfire, sending sparks swirling into the night sky. Question is, which parts were lies? I don't think she lied about who I am, Sarah said. When she called me Sarah Daniels, something resonated, like hearing a familiar melody after years of silence. And your connection to James Daniels, being his sister, Sarah closed her eyes, concentrating. That feels true as well. But there's something about his relationship with Elizabeth that doesn't align with what Margaret said. In my dreams I see a woman, blonde like Elizabeth, and the emotions I feel aren't jealousy or betrayal, they're protective. Sheriff Harmon considered this. If James married Elizabeth as part of a scheme to secure those mining claims, perhaps you objected. Maybe you grew close to her, tried to warn her. And that's why I survived the massacre with her locket, Sarah continued, the theory taking shape. I wasn't part of the ambush. I was trying to prevent it. The sheriff's weathered face showed skepticism. It's a comforting thought. But if that's true, why take her locket? Why not simply tell her to run? Sarah had no answer, and as night deepened around them, her certainties felt as fleeting as the sparks from the fire. They reached Willow Creek shortly after noon the next day to find the town in an unusual state of activity. A sleek black carriage stood outside the hotel, the kind rarely seen in the frontier town, with gleaming brass fittings and a matched pair of thoroughbreds in harness. Looks like we have visitors, Deputy Fletcher remarked as they rode down. The main street, Sheriff Harmon frowned. Take Mrs. Winters to jail. I'll meet you there after I see what this is about. As Sarah dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, she noticed a well-dressed man emerging from the hotel. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a meticulously trimmed beard, he carried himself with the easy confidence of wealth. When he spotted their group, he froze momentarily, then strode purposefully in their direction. "Sheriff Harmon," he called, his voice cultured but with an edge of steel. "I've been waiting for your return." The sheriff subtly positioned himself between Sarah and the approaching stranger. "And you are Charles Prescott." The man extended his hand. "I've come from Boston regarding the Montgomery tragedy. I understand you may have found a survivor." Sheriff Harmon didn't take the offered hand. "News travels fast." "In certain circles, yes." Prescott's gaze shifted to Sarah, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. "And this is..." Before the sheriff could answer, Sarah stepped forward. "Sarah Daniels," she said firmly, watching for his reaction. It came instantly, a flash of surprise quickly masked by a polite smile. "Miss Daniels, James's sister. How unexpected." His gaze lingered on the silver locket at her throat. "And wearing Elizabeth's jewelry, I see." The casual observation carried unmistakable menace. Sheriff Harmon placed a warning hand on his holstered revolver. "Mr. Prescott, I'm in the middle of an investigation. If you have information about the Montgomery massacre, I'd be happy to take your statement to my office." "Of course," Prescott agreed smoothly. "Though I'm more interested in what Miss Daniels might tell us. After all, she was there, wasn't she?" Sarah felt a chill despite the afternoon heat. This man knew her, or of her, and there was something calculating in his gaze that belied his cordial manner. "Mr. Prescott," she said, remembering the letters they'd found, "you were engaged to Elizabeth Montgomery." A shadow crossed his handsome features. "Briefly, yes, until she eloped with James Daniels, your brother, a decision that proved fatal." "You think James was responsible for the massacre?" Sheriff Harmon stated, watching Prescott's reaction. "I know he was," Prescott replied coldly. "The question is whether his sister was complicit or merely another victim." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I have no memory of the events. Amnesia, the doctor says." Prescott's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How convenient." Sheriff Harmon stepped between them. "That's enough. Mr. Prescott, my office, 1 hour. Miss Daniels, Doc Wilson is expecting you." He lowered his voice. "Stay there until I come for you. Don't go anywhere alone." As Sarah made her way to the doctor's house, she could feel Prescott's eyes following her, as sharp and cold as the mountain wind. "Charles Prescott," Doc Wilson mused, pouring tea in his cluttered study. "The name was in those letters, right? Elizabeth's former fiancé." Sarah nodded, warming her hands on the teacup. "He claims James orchestrated the massacre, that I might have been involved. And what do you think?" "I think—" Sarah hesitated, sorting through her jumbled impressions. "I think Prescott isn't here out of concern for Elizabeth. There's something else driving him." The doctor leaned back in his chair. "The mining claims, perhaps? With both Montgomery and Daniels dead, who inherits?" Before Sarah could respond, a flash of memory struck her, vivid and painful. A document on heavy paper, a signature, her own hand holding the pen, blood on the page. Sarah. Doc Wilson was at her side, concerned. "What is it?" "A deed," she whispered. "I signed something, a transfer of ownership, in the cabin just before—" She pressed her palms to her temples, willing the memory to continue, but it slipped away like water through her fingers. "Before the massacre?" Doc Wilson prompted gently. "I think so, but I can't remember what it was for or who it was to." Frustration edged her voice. "These fragments are worse than knowing nothing." The doctor patted her hand sympathetically. "The mind heals in its own time. Push too hard, and you might drive the memories further away." Sarah sipped her tea, thinking of Charles Prescott's calculated gaze and Margaret Winter's half-truths. "Time may be a luxury I don't have." Sheriff Harmon sat across from Charles Prescott in his office, a stenographer recording their conversation. The Boston businessman had shed his initial hostility, presenting instead a veneer of helpful cooperation. "I was in Denver on business when I heard about the massacre," Prescott explained. "Richard Montgomery was a business associate. We had interests in the same mining operations near Silverton." "The ones he was disputing with Edward Daniels," the sheriff noted. Prescott nodded. "Edward discovered the silver deposits but lacked the capital to develop them. He partnered with Montgomery, who eventually sought to push him out entirely. When Edward died last year, his son James took up the fight and married Montgomery's daughter. A transparent ploy," Prescott said dismissively. "Elizabeth was naive, sheltered. James convinced her it was a romantic elopement. when in fact he was using her to gain leverage over her father. Sheriff Harmon made a note. You seem well informed about James Daniels' motives. I make it my business to understand my adversaries, Prescott replied coolly. Especially when they steal my fiancée. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. So, this is personal for you. It became personal when I identified Elizabeth's body in that mass grave, Prescott said, his composure cracking slightly. When I saw what had been done to her. And Sarah Daniels? What's your interest in her? Prescott hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Sarah was always devoted to her brother. Too devoted, some might say. If James planned the massacre, she would have known. She might even have helped. Yet she survived, with no memory, and wearing Elizabeth's locket, Sheriff Harmon pointed out. Why would James leave his own sister to die after she helped him? Perhaps she had a change of heart, tried to warn them. Prescott leaned forward, his expression earnest. Or perhaps this amnesia is an act, and she's playing you for a fool, while her brother prepares to finish what he started. The sheriff's face remained impassive. And what might that be, Mr. Prescott? The mining claims, Sheriff. With Montgomery dead and his heir, Elizabeth, also conveniently deceased, those claims revert to the next male heir in the Montgomery line. A distant cousin in San Francisco, I believe. Prescott's smile was thin, unless, of course, there's a document transferring ownership elsewhere. Sheriff Harmon thought of the leather portfolio found at the massacre site, with its contracts and maps. You think Daniels forced Elizabeth to sign over her inheritance before killing her? I think it's worth investigating, Prescott replied, and I think Sarah Daniels knows more than she's claiming. After Prescott left, Sheriff Harmon sat alone in his office, reviewing his notes. The businessman's story aligned with what they knew, yet something about it felt rehearsed, calculated. And his fixation on Sarah suggested motives beyond justice for Elizabeth. The sheriff was reaching for his hat when Deputy Fletcher burst in, his face flushed with urgency. "Sheriff, Margaret Winters is dead." The housekeeper lay sprawled on the floor of her cell, her face contorted in a grimace of pain. Doc Wilson knelt beside the body, examining it with methodical precision. "Poison, I'd wager," he said grimly. "Likely in her evening meal." Sheriff Harmon surveyed the scene with mounting frustration. "Who brought her food?" "One of the hotel staff," Deputy Fletcher replied. "Said a gentleman paid him to deliver it. As a courtesy, didn't get a name. Tall, dark hair and beard? Well-dressed?" The deputy nodded. "That's him," Sheriff Harmon cursed under his breath. "Charles Prescott. Find him now. And check on Sarah at your place, Doc. Make sure she's safe." But when they reached the doctor's house, they found the guest room empty, the window open to the cool evening air. On the bedside table was a note in Sarah's handwriting. "I remember where to find the deed. Going to the cabin. Don't follow. Too dangerous. I'll return by morning. S.D. "Damn it," Sheriff Harmon muttered. "She's walking into a trap." Doc Wilson looked confused. But why would she go back there? And what deed? Something she remembered earlier. A document she signed before the massacre. The sheriff was already heading for the door. Prescott mentioned it too. Transfer of ownership for the mining claims. I'm betting that's what this is all about. "But why kill Margaret Winters?" Doc Wilson asked, following him outside. "Because she knew too much," Sheriff Harmon replied grimly. "And I suspect our Charles Prescott isn't exactly who he claims to be." Sarah rode through the night, pushing her borrowed horse harder than was wise on the treacherous mountain trails. The memory had come to her suddenly as she dozed in Doc Wilson's guest room, the cabin where she'd met Margaret Winters, but months earlier. A different meeting. James was there and Elizabeth, and a document signing that had ended in shouting threats. Blood. She had to know the truth, and that truth was hidden in the abandoned miner's cabin. Dawn was breaking as she approached the clearing, bathing the dilapidated structure in pink gold light. She dismounted carefully, listening for any sound that might indicate she wasn't alone. Hearing nothing but birdsong and the rustle of wind through pine needles, she cautiously made her way to the cabin door. Inside, the air was thick with dust and abandonment. Sarah moved directly to the stone fireplace, running her fingers along the rough-hewn mantel until she found what she sought, a loose stone that pivoted to reveal a small, hidden compartment. Within lay a folded document, its edges singed as if someone had attempted to burn it. Sarah withdrew it with trembling hands, unfolding it carefully to reveal elegant legal script. It was a deed transfer, just as she'd remembered, but not for mining claims, for a parcel of land in Boston, a townhouse in Beacon Hill, property of the Montgomery family for generations, and the signatures at the bottom made her breath catch: Elizabeth Montgomery Daniels and, as witness, Sarah Daniels. Not what you expected. Sarah whirled to find Charles Prescott standing in the doorway, a revolver trained on her heart. His urbane manner had vanished, replaced by cold efficiency. "You killed Margaret," she said, backing away slowly. "After? She told you where I'd gone," Prescott shrugged, stepping into the cabin. "She served her purpose, just as you did yours." Which was what exactly? Sarah clutched the deed, trying to understand its significance. To witness your brother's marriage to Elizabeth, to make it legal. Prescott nodded at the document in her hands. And to witness that deed transfer, Elizabeth's wedding gift to James, the Boston house, a rather modest consolation prize considering what she was truly worth. Sarah's mind was racing, pieces falling into place. But the mining claims were never James's objective, Prescott finished for her. He wanted Montgomery's shipping business, the true source of the family fortune, and for that he needed Elizabeth alive. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "You arranged the massacre, not James." Prescott's smile was chilling. "Very good, Sarah. Your memory is returning faster than I anticipated." "But why?" Sarah demanded. "What did you gain by killing?" "Them all? Montgomery refused to accept me as a son-in-law because I wasn't from the right social circle," Prescott said, bitterness edging his voice. "He pushed Elizabeth toward more suitable matches. When she fell for James Daniels instead, a man with a legitimate claim to property Montgomery had essentially stolen, I saw an opportunity." "For revenge," Sarah whispered. "For justice," Prescott corrected. "I hired men to ambush the wagon train. They were supposed to kill everyone except Elizabeth. She would inherit everything, and as her former fiancé, I would comfort her in her grief." His expression darkened. "But something went wrong. You interfered, tried to save her. In the confusion, Elizabeth was killed." Sarah closed her eyes, the memory flooding back. The gunfire, the screams, running to Elizabeth's wagon, finding her already wounded. "I tried to stop the bleeding. She gave me her locket, made me promise to return it to her mother. And then, my men found you," Prescott continued, "knocked you unconscious. I ordered them to leave you behind with the locket. If anyone discovered the massacre, they'd find a traumatized young woman who appeared to be Elizabeth Montgomery." His smile was cruel. "The perfect distraction, while I established my claim to the Montgomery fortune through a distant cousin in San Francisco, who I should mention exists only on paper. The courts would never accept—" "The courts will accept whatever documentation I provide," Prescott interrupted, "especially when the only witness who might contradict it conveniently disappears." He raised the revolver, his intent clear. Sarah tensed, preparing to dive aside, when a shot rang out, not from Prescott's gun, but from behind him. The businessman staggered forward, a look of shock on his face as a crimson stain spread across his immaculate shirt. He turned, revealing Sheriff Harmon standing in the doorway, his revolver still raised. "I heard enough," the sheriff said grimly. Prescott crumpled to the floor, his gun clattering away. Sarah rushed to the sheriff's side, nearly collapsing with relief. "How did you find me?" she gasped. "Followed your trail," Sheriff Harmon replied, keeping his weapon trained on Prescott's prone form. "Not hard when you ride hell-bent through the night on a horse with distinctive shoes." He nodded at the deed in her hand. "Found what you were looking for?" Sarah looked down at the document, then at the dying man on the cabin floor. "Part of it. But there's still so much I don't remember." Prescott coughed, blood bubbling at his lips. "James," he rasped, "still alive, Denver." His eyes found Sarah's, filled with malice even as the light faded from them. "He never knew what I planned. Think he'll forgive you for surviving with." Those final words, Charles Prescott died, taking many of his secrets with him. Sheriff Harmon holstered his weapon, his face grave. "We need to get back to Willow Creek. Send telegrams to Denver. Find your brother before he comes looking for you." Sarah nodded numbly, still processing Prescott's revelations. "James is innocent, of the massacre at least." "Maybe," the sheriff agreed cautiously, "but an innocent man doesn't usually disappear when his wife and sister go missing." As they left the cabin, the deed secure in Sheriff Harmon's pocket, Sarah paused to look back at Prescott's body. The man had orchestrated a massacre out of wounded pride and greed, had nearly killed her twice, yet his death brought her no satisfaction, only a hollow emptiness where her memories should be. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. Sheriff Harmon's weathered face softened with compassion. "Now we find the truth, all of it, including who Sarah Daniels really is." Sarah touched the locket around her neck, Elizabeth's locket, a final desperate gift from a dying woman. "I'm not sure I want to know any more." "Some truths aren't about what we want," the sheriff replied. "They're about what we need to face, in order to be free." As they mounted their horses, the first heavy drops of a summer storm began to fall, washing away their tracks. Behind them, the abandoned cabin stood silent, keeper of secrets both revealed and still hidden. Ahead lay Willow Creek, Denver beyond, and somewhere a brother who might hold the final pieces of Sarah's shattered past. Thunder rolled across the mountains, promising a storm to match the one brewing within her, one that would not end until she reclaimed every fragment of her identity, no matter how painful the process might be. The telegram to Denver's authorities went out immediately upon their return to Willow Creek. Sheriff Harmon was precise in his instructions. Locate James Daniels, but approach with caution, not as a suspect, but as a potential witness, and himself possibly in danger. Sarah spent the following days recovering at Doc Wilson's home, her mind gradually piecing together fragments of her past. Each memory that surfaced was like a shard of broken glass, sharp-edged and painful to touch, yet essential to reconstructing the complete picture. "I remember a house," she told Sheriff Harmon during one of his daily visits. "Grand but somber, dark wood and heavy curtains, James pacing before the fireplace, agitated. Your family home in Denver," the sheriff suggested. Sarah nodded slowly. "I think so." There was a portrait above the mantel. Our father, Edward Daniels. James was saying something about making things right. The mining dispute with Montgomery? Perhaps. Sarah frowned. Concentrating, but it felt more personal than business. James kept saying father had been betrayed, that Montgomery had stolen more than just claims. Sheriff Harmon made a note in the small leather-bound notebook he carried. Could explain the marriage to Elizabeth, revenge wrapped in romance. "No," Sarah said with unexpected certainty. "James truly cared for her. I remember them together, the way he looked at her. That wasn't a pretense." Before the sheriff could respond, Deputy Fletcher appeared at the doorway, his expression unusually grave. "Telegraph from Denver, Sheriff. They found James Daniels." James Daniels had been discovered in a boarding house on the outskirts of Denver, not hiding as they'd expected, but recovering from a gunshot wound to the chest. According to Denver's authorities, he'd been found 3 weeks earlier. shortly after the massacre by the boarding house owner who had summoned a doctor rather than the law. He claimed he'd been robbed on the road, Sheriff Harmon read from the telegram. Didn't give his real name at first, only admitted to being James Daniels when they pressed him about the Montgomery massacre. Sarah sat perfectly still, absorbing this information. Is he under arrest? No. The Denver sheriff reports he's cooperating fully. Claims he was traveling separately from the wagon train when he was ambushed, shot and left for dead. Says he had no idea his wife and the others had been killed until he regained consciousness days later. He's telling the truth, Sarah said softly. I remember now. Elizabeth insisted James ride ahead to prepare their new home in Silverton. She would follow with her family. Her gaze grew distant. She wanted time to convince her father to accept the marriage. She believed once they reached Silverton, once her father saw their happiness. Sheriff Harmon watched her carefully. You're remembering more. It comes in waves, sometimes just impressions, sometimes vivid scenes. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, a habit she'd developed. But there are still gaps. Why was I on that wagon train instead of with James? What made Prescott target me specifically after the massacre? The sheriff had no answers, only more questions. The Denver authorities want to know if you're well. Enough to travel. They're holding James until we arrive. Sarah stood, smoothing her borrowed dress with steady hands. When do we leave? Denver in 1878 was a city straddling two worlds. Part frontier outpost, part emerging metropolis. Brick buildings and paved streets existed alongside muddy alleys where pigs roamed freely. Elegant carriages shared roads with dusty wagons. It was a place of opportunity and ruthlessness in equal measure. For Sarah, entering the city sparked cascades of recognition. The broad avenue leading from the train station, the wrought iron lampposts, the stone courthouse with its imposing columns. Each familiar sight unlocked another memory, filling in the mosaic of her past. I know this place, she murmured, as their carriage passed a three-story brownstone with emerald green shutters. The Henderson residence. Martha Henderson was my friend. We attended the same school for young ladies. Sheriff Harmon, seated across from her, nodded encouragingly. Good. The more you remember about your life here, the better prepared you'll be to face your brother. Sarah turned from the window, anxiety creasing her brow. What if he's changed? What if Prescott was lying, and James really did arrange the massacre? What if— One step at a time, the sheriff interrupted gently. First, we hear his side, then we decide what's true. The Denver Sheriff's Office occupied the first floor of the courthouse, its entrance flanked by deputies who eyed Sheriff Harmon's frontier attire with poorly disguised disdain. Inside, they were met by Sheriff William Blackwood, a corpulent man with shrewd eyes and a politician's handshake. Harmon, he greeted his counterpart, your telegram caused quite a stir. The Montgomerys and Daniels are prominent families. This massacre business has the whole city talking. Harmon remained businesslike. We're here to see James Daniels. Yes. Yes, he's in the infirmary. Still recovering, you understand. Blackwood's gaze shifted to Sarah, his expression calculating. And this must be the sister, the one with the convenient memory loss. Sarah met his skepticism with quiet dignity. My name is Sarah Daniels. I've come to speak with my brother. Blackwood huffed, but led them through a series of corridors to a separate wing of the building. He's not under arrest, the Denver sheriff clarified. More like protective custody. Given what happened to the Montgomerys, it seemed prudent. The infirmary was small but clean, with 4 beds separated by white cotton screens. Only one was occupied, by a man who struggled to sit upright when they entered. Sarah? His voice was hoarse with disbelief. My God, it's really you. James Daniels had his sister's golden hair and blue eyes, though pain and recovery had left him gaunt. Bandages circled his chest beneath a loose cotton shirt, and several days' growth of beard shadowed his jaw. Despite his weakened state, there was a coiled energy about him, like a wounded predator. Sarah approached slowly, studying the face that was simultaneously familiar and strange. "James," she acknowledged, "you've been shot." A bark of laughter escaped him. "Always direct, little sister, even when we were children." His smile faded. "They told me you had amnesia, that you couldn't remember what happened. Most of it remains." "Unclear," Sarah admitted, "but pieces are returning." James looked past her to Sheriff Harmon, wariness replacing his initial relief. "And who is your companion?" "Sheriff Thomas Harmon, Willow Creek," the lawman introduced himself. "I found your sister, or rather, she was brought to my town after the massacre." "For which I'm grateful," James said carefully. "Though I'm curious why you've accompanied her all the way to Denver." "Because 7 people are dead, Mr. Daniels," Sheriff Harmon replied bluntly, "including your wife, and until recently the prime suspect was you." James flinched as if struck. "Elizabeth," he whispered, grief naked on his face. "I only learned she was gone when I regained consciousness. By then, it was too late to—" He trailed off, composing himself with visible effort. "I didn't kill my wife, Sheriff, or her family, or arrange for others to do it." "Then who did?" Harmon pressed. "And why were you separated from the wagon train? Why were you shot?" James's expression hardened. "I think you already know the answer to both questions. The same man who orchestrated the massacre also tried to eliminate me." "Charles Prescott," Sarah supplied. James nodded grimly. "Elizabeth's former fiancé, a man consumed by rejection and greed." He shifted on the bed, wincing with the movement. "I rode ahead to prepare our home in Silverton, at Elizabeth's insistence. She thought—" He paused, swallowing hard. "She thought having our own place ready would help her father accept our marriage. I was a day's ride from the wagon train when Prescott and 2 men ambushed me, shot me and left me for dead in a ravine." "How did you survive?" Sheriff Harmon asked. "Luck. A passing prospector found me, took me to his camp. By the time I was strong enough to travel to the nearest town, days had passed." James's eyes found Sarah's. "I sent telegrams everywhere looking for the wagon train, for Elizabeth, for you. No one had seen any of you." Sarah took a step closer to her brother's bedside. "Why was I traveling with the Montgomerys instead of with you?" A shadow crossed James's face. "You and Elizabeth had become close, sisters by marriage, but friends by choice. When I suggested riding ahead, she asked if you would stay with her for the journey. 'For company,' she said." His expression turned, bitter. "But I think she also wanted you there as a buffer between her and her father. Richard Montgomery never approved of our marriage. He was difficult. Difficult enough that someone might want him dead?" Sheriff Harmon interjected. James didn't flinch from the implication. Montgomery had enemies. He built his fortune by crushing competitors, appropriating others' discoveries, including our father's mining claims. His voice softened. "But Elizabeth was nothing like him. She was kind, genuine. When we met at a Denver social function, neither of us knew about the business connection between our families. By the time we discovered it, we were already in love." Sarah closed her eyes, a memory surfacing. Elizabeth in a pale blue dress, laughing as she twirled in a sunlit parlor. "James will be so surprised," she was saying. "A baby. Our baby. Promise you won't tell him yet, Sarah. I want to see his face when I tell him myself." "She was with child," Sarah blurted, the words escaping before she fully processed the memory. James went utterly still. "What did you say?" "Elizabeth was carrying your child. She told me the day before." Sarah faltered, the rest of the memory slipping away like water between fingers. The color drained from James's face. "She never told me," he whispered. "She wanted to surprise me." his hands clenched into fists on the bed covers. "Prescott took everything. My wife, my child nearly, my sister." His eyes, so like Sarah's, blazed with cold fury. "Where is he now?" Sheriff Harmon and Sarah exchanged glances. "Dead," the sheriff answered flatly. "Shot while attempting to kill your sister." Something passed over James's features, relief mingled with disappointment. "Then it's over." "Not entirely," Sheriff Harmon countered. "There's still the matter of the mining claims, the deed your sister found, and the gaps in her memory that might reveal Prescott's true motives." James looked at Sarah with renewed intensity. "What deed?" She explained about the document found in the cabin, the transfer of the Boston townhouse, witnessed by her signature. It wasn't what Prescott expected to find. He seemed surprised, even angry when he saw it, because it wasn't what he was looking for, James said slowly. "There was another document, one Elizabeth prepared after we were married." "What kind of document?" Sheriff Harmon pressed. James hesitated, clearly weighing how much to reveal. A transfer of ownership, not for the Boston house, but for her inheritance in the Montgomery shipping business. The true source of their wealth, the mining operations, were a side venture, valuable but not essential. He looked at Sarah. "Elizabeth signed control of her future inheritance to me, with you as witness. It was her way of defying her father, asserting her independence." Sarah frowned, concentrating. "I remember the signing, but there was an argument afterward. Blood." She looked up, confused. "Was someone hurt? A flicker of something? Guilt? Fear?" crossed James's face. "Richard Montgomery arrived unexpectedly. He'd been following Elizabeth, trying to prevent our marriage. When he saw the document she'd signed, he became enraged. There was a struggle. He fell, struck his head on the corner of the desk." James's voice dropped. "He survived, but the injury left him disoriented, volatile. That's partly why Elizabeth insisted on traveling with him to Silverton. She felt responsible." Sheriff Harmon's expression remained neutral, but Sarah sensed his skepticism. "And the document, what happened to it?" "Elizabeth kept it," James replied. "Said she'd present it to her father once they reached Silverton, once he'd seen our home and understood our commitment." His expression darkened. "Prescott must have learned about it somehow, must have realized that with both Elizabeth and me, dead and the document destroyed, he could manipulate the inheritance through false claims." "But why kill the entire wagon train?" Sarah asked. "Why not just Elizabeth and her father?" James had no answer, and the question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken suspicions. After a prolonged silence, Sheriff Harmon stood. "I think that's enough for today. Miss Daniels, we should let your brother rest." Sarah hesitated, torn between the pull of family loyalty and the persistent sense that James wasn't telling the whole truth. "Will you be well enough to travel soon?" she asked her brother. James nodded. "Another week, perhaps. The doctor says the wound is healing well." He reached for her hand. "Stay in Denver, Sarah. Our family home is still there, waiting. We can rebuild our lives once this is behind us." She allowed the brief contact, but didn't commit to his request. "We'll speak again tomorrow. Perhaps by then I'll remember more." As they left the infirmary, Sheriff Harmon remained silent until they were outside the courthouse, beyond the hearing of Denver's officials. "Your brother's story has convenient gaps," he observed, "and he seems very interested in what you do and don't remember." Sarah nodded, troubled by the same impression. Something feels wrong, like he's measuring his words, telling partial truths. "Do you remember the family home he mentioned?" "Vaguely. Enough to find it, I think." The sheriff glanced at the westering sun. "Then perhaps we should pay it a visit before nightfall, see what else might jog your memory." The Daniels family residence stood on a quiet street lined with elm trees, its brick facade distinguished but not ostentatious compared to neighboring homes. Sarah paused at the wrought iron gate, feeling a strange reluctance to proceed. "What is it?" Sheriff Harmon asked, noting her hesitation. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Part of me recognizes this place, but another part feels wary, as if there's danger here." The sheriff's hand moved subtly closer to his holstered revolver. "We can come back tomorrow with Denver's authorities." Sarah shook her head. "No, I need to do this now." She pushed open the gate, which moved with a familiar creak that sent a shiver of recognition down her spine. The front door was locked, but Sarah found a key beneath a stone urn filled with wilting flowers, exactly where she somehow knew it would be. Inside, the house was cool and silent, draped in shadows as the late afternoon sun struggled to penetrate the heavy curtains. The entry hall opened onto a formal parlor to the right and a dining room to the left. Straight ahead, a wide staircase led to the upper floors. Everything was immaculately maintained, as if the family had simply stepped out for the afternoon rather than been absent for weeks. "Someone's been caring for the place," Sheriff Harmon observed, running a finger along a side table free of dust. "Probably Mrs. Fletcher, our housekeeper," Sarah said automatically, then blinked in surprise at the casual return of this knowledge. They moved through the house methodically, each room triggering new memories for Sarah. The parlor, where she had practiced piano as a child. The study, where her father had taught James about business. The conservatory, where she read on rainy afternoons. But it was the library on the second floor that called to her most strongly. A handsome room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a massive oak desk. Sarah crossed to it with unerring certainty, running her hands along its polished surface. "This was my father's desk," she said softly. "James took it over after he died." Her fingers found a small brass button cleverly concealed in the carved edging. When pressed, a hidden drawer sprang open beneath the desktop. Sheriff Harmon moved closer as Sarah reached into the compartment, withdrawing a small leather journal bound with a strap. "Father's private ledger," she explained, her voice distant as memories continued to surface. "He kept records of all his business dealings here, especially those he didn't want others to know about." She untied the strap, opening the journal, to reveal pages of neat, precise handwriting, interspersed with columns of figures. "Look at the last entries," Sheriff Harmon suggested. Sarah flipped to the final written pages, dated just weeks before the massacre. As she scanned the cramped script, her face paled. "What is it?" the sheriff pressed. "Insurance," she whispered. "James took out insurance policies. On Elizabeth, on me." She looked up, shock evident in her expression. "Substantial policies, payable to him upon our deaths." Sheriff Harmon's face hardened. "When were these purchased?" 2 weeks before the wedding. Before anyone outside the family knew about the marriage." Sarah continued reading, her hands beginning to shake. "And there's more. Correspondence with someone identified only as CP about a mutual arrangement beneficial to both parties." "Charles Prescott," Sheriff Harmon said grimly. "Your brother wasn't Prescott's victim. He was his partner. We need to get this to—" "Sheriff Blackwood," Sheriff Harmon said, carefully taking the ledger from Sarah's trembling hands. "Your brother's story just fell apart." Sarah stood motionless by the desk, her mind reeling from the implications. James and Prescott working together? It doesn't make sense. They were rivals for Elizabeth's affection. A rivalry that may have been staged, Sheriff Harmon suggested grimly. The perfect cover for a partnership based on greed. Sarah shook her head, struggling to reconcile this revelation with her fragmented memories. "But I remember James's love for Elizabeth. It seemed genuine." "Perhaps it was, at first," the sheriff conceded, "but something changed. The ledger doesn't lie, Sarah. Insurance policies taken out weeks before the massacre, secret correspondence. With Prescott? These aren't coincidences." Before she could respond, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside the library. Sheriff Harmon's hand flew to his revolver, but he wasn't fast enough. The door burst open to reveal a burly man with a shotgun already leveled at them. "Don't move," he growled. "Mr. Daniels was right. Said you might come snooping around here." Sheriff Harmon kept his hand near his weapon. "And who might you be?" "Name's Porter. I work for Mr. Daniels." The man's eyes narrowed at Sarah. "He's mighty disappointed in you, miss. Said you've been confused since the accident, making wild accusations." Sarah's blood ran cold. "James sent you? But he's in the infirmary at the courthouse." Porter's laugh was harsh. "That's what everyone's supposed to think. Mr. Daniels left an hour ago, has business to attend to." He gestured with the shotgun. "Now both of you, nice and slow, downstairs. Mr. Daniels wants a word before he leaves town." Sheriff Harmon's expression remained neutral, but Sarah saw his mind working, calculating odds and options. "Leaves town? Where's he going?" "None of your concern, lawman." Porter motioned again with the shotgun. "Move, or I start taking pieces off the lady." They had no choice but to comply, descending the stairs with Porter close behind. In the main parlor, Sarah froze at the sight of her brother. James Daniels sat in their father's favorite wingback chair, dressed for travel in a fine suit that concealed his injuries. His face was still pale, but determination had replaced the weakness he'd displayed in the infirmary. Beside him on a small table lay a revolver within easy reach. "Sarah," he greeted her, his tone gentle despite the circumstances. "I'd hoped to spare you this ugliness." Sheriff Harmon stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Sarah. "Your recovery seems remarkably accelerated, Mr. Daniels." James smiled thinly. "Amazing what proper motivation can accomplish." His gaze shifted to the ledger in the sheriff's hand. "I see you found Father's journal. Disappointing. I'd hoped to be long gone before anyone discovered that particular piece of evidence." "It confirms you worked with Prescott," Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. "That you planned the massacre together." A crude simplification, but not entirely inaccurate. James sighed, as if burdened by the need to explain. "Please, sit. Both of you. Porter gets nervous when people stand too close to me with firearms." "Sheriff." Harmon remained standing. "I'll pass." "As you wish." James carefully adjusted his position, wincing slightly. "Yes, Prescott and I had an arrangement. He wanted Richard Montgomery ruined for rejecting him as a suitor for Elizabeth. I wanted control of the Montgomery shipping interests. Our goals aligned temporarily." "And Elizabeth?" Sarah pressed. "Was she just a pawn in your scheme?" "A shadow." Passed over James's features, genuine regret or a convincing facsimile. "No. My feelings for Elizabeth were real. The marriage was not part of the original plan. We met by chance, fell in love. It was unexpected, but convenient, Sheriff." Harmon observed coldly. James's expression hardened. "When opportunity presents itself, a wise businessman adapts. With Elizabeth as my wife, controlling Montgomery's empire became simpler. No need for complex maneuvering." "So you adjusted your arrangement with Prescott," the sheriff continued. "Instead of ruining Montgomery, you'd help each other seize his assets." "Precisely. Elizabeth would inherit everything upon her father's death. As her husband, I would control those assets. Prescott would receive a generous portion for his assistance." James leaned forward, his eyes fixed on Sarah. "It should have been clean, simple, no bloodshed necessary." "Then what went wrong?" Sarah whispered. James's gaze darkened. "Elizabeth discovered the truth about my partnership with Prescott, about the true nature of my business with her father." He looked away, his jaw tight. "She confronted me the night before I rode ahead to Silverton, threatened to expose everything to her father." "So you changed plans again," Sheriff Harmon said. "Decided to eliminate everyone and collect the insurance instead." "Not everyone," James corrected, his gaze returning to Sarah. Never you, sister. You were to be spared. A fragmented memory flashed through Sarah's mind, James holding her hands, his expression urgent. Stay with Elizabeth. Watch her. Don't let her speak to her father alone. It's for her own protection. You sent me to spy on her, Sarah realized aloud, to prevent her from revealing your scheme. To protect her from her own naivety, James countered. If she'd just kept quiet, played her role. He shook his head. But she insisted on righteousness, insisted on telling her father everything. So you arranged the massacre, Sheriff Harmon stated flatly. Had Prescott hired gunmen to ambush the wagon train while you established an alibi by getting attacked separately? James didn't deny it. Prescott was supposed to ensure you were removed from the wagon train beforehand, Sarah. His men had instructions to separate you, bring you safely to Denver after it was done. But I wouldn't leave Elizabeth, Sarah murmured, another memory surfacing. She told me she was pregnant. I promised to stay by her side. Pain flashed across James's face, the first genuine emotion he'd displayed. I didn't know about the child. Not until today. Prescott never told me. Would it have made a difference? Sheriff Harmon asked skeptically. James was silent for a long moment. Perhaps not, he finally admitted. Too much was at stake by then. And when Prescott's men found me alive after the massacre, Sarah pressed. With Elizabeth's locket? A complication. Prescott saw an opportunity. If we couldn't have you safely, hidden away, we could use you as a distraction. A traumatized survivor with no memory wearing Montgomery's daughter's locket. Perfect misdirection while we secured the assets. Sarah felt ill. You were going to let me believe I was Elizabeth. Let me carry that guilt. Only temporarily, James assured her. Once everything was settled, I would have found you, helped you recover your true memories. We would have started fresh, wealthy, beyond imagination. Sheriff Harmon's expression was stone. And Prescott, was he going to accept you showing up alive after he'd arranged your death? James's smile was cold. Prescott's usefulness was nearing its end. His own accident was already being arranged. The casual way he spoke, of murder, of betraying his partner, his wife, even his unborn child, made Sarah's skin crawl. This calculating monster couldn't be the brother she remembered, the boy who had taught her to ride, who had defended her from schoolyard bullies. What happened to you, James? She asked softly. When did you become this person? Something vulnerable flickered behind his eyes. When I watched our father die broken and penniless after Montgomery stole everything from him. When I realized justice doesn't exist unless you create it yourself. His expression hardened again. But we've talked enough. Porter, the ledger, please. The burly man stepped forward to take the journal from Sheriff Harmon, who released it, reluctantly, clearly gauging the odds of drawing his weapon before Porter could react. Don't, Sheriff, James warned, picking up his revolver. I've no desire to kill an officer of the law, but I will if necessary. Sarah watched the exchange, her mind racing. James was wounded, moving carefully despite his bravado. Porter was formidable, but focused on Sheriff Harmon as the primary threat. Neither was paying full attention to her, a mistake born of underestimation. What happens now? She asked, deliberately pitching her voice higher, playing into their perception of her as the weaker party. James tucked the revolver into his jacket pocket, the ledger now secure in his free hand. Now I leave for San Francisco, where certain documents await my signature. Porter will keep you both comfortable. Until morning, by which time I'll be well beyond your reach. And then what, we're just released? Sheriff Harmon asked skeptically. Denver is not my jurisdiction, James replied. What happens here is regrettable but necessary. Sheriff Blackwood is a practical man, amenable to certain financial arrangements. Your unfortunate deaths during a burglary gone wrong will be tragic, but ultimately forgotten. Sarah felt cold determination replace her fear. James intended to murder them, to add 2 more bodies to his tally of destruction. She couldn't allow it, not just for herself, but for Elizabeth, for the child that never had a chance to live, for the 7 souls already lost to her brother's greed. She remembered the house from her childhood, remembering its secrets, and, most importantly, remembered what hung on the wall behind James's chair. "You've forgotten who taught me to shoot, brother," she said quietly. James's brow furrowed in confusion. "What?" In one fluid motion, Sarah reached behind the nearby bookshelf, to the hidden lever their father had installed decades ago. A section of wood paneling slid sideways, revealing a mounted Colt revolver, their father's emergency weapon, always kept loaded. Before Porter could swing his shotgun around, before James could draw his revolver, Sarah had the Colt in her hand, aimed with unwavering precision at her brother's chest. "Sarah," James began, his tone placating, "think about what you're doing. We're family, the only family either of us has left." "You destroyed our family when you chose money over humanity," she replied, her voice steady. "When you sacrificed Elizabeth and your own child for power." Sheriff Harmon had drawn his weapon now, too, covering Porter, who stood frozen, uncertain, without direct orders. "Put the shotgun down," the sheriff commanded. Slowly. Porter hesitated, looking to James for instruction. "Do as he says," James ordered tersely, his eyes never leaving Sarah's. "This isn't over yet," Porter complied, setting the shotgun on the floor and stepping back with his hands raised. "The ledger," Sarah said to her brother. "Place it on the table, then empty your pockets, slowly." James's expression hardened, calculation replacing his initial shock. "You won't shoot me, Sarah. You don't have it in you to kill your own blood." Sarah adjusted her aim slightly, firing a shot that splintered the wood of the chair, mere inches from his ear. James flinched violently, his face draining of color. "The next one won't miss," she promised. "I remember everything now, James. Every manipulation, every lie. How you used me to get close to Elizabeth. How you smiled at her wedding while plotting her death." Her voice remained eerily calm. "The brother I loved died with our father. I don't know what replaced him, but it's not something I need to preserve." James stared at her for a long moment, measuring her resolve. Whatever he saw in her eyes must have convinced him. Slowly, he placed the ledger on the table, then emptied. His pockets, the revolver, a wallet thick with banknotes, a train ticket to San Francisco, and a folded document that Sarah recognized instantly. "The transfer deed," she breathed. "Elizabeth's signature giving you control of the Montgomery shipping interests." "The original," James confirmed bitterly. "The one document that could make everything worthwhile." Sheriff Harmon collected the items while keeping Porter covered. "Sarah, check him for hidden weapons." She approached her brother cautiously, the Colt never wavering. James submitted to the search with a clenched jaw, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred and more unsettling pride. "You're more like me than you admit," he murmured, as she checked his ankles for a concealed derringer. "The Daniels' ruthlessness. Father would be impressed." Sarah stepped back, finding nothing else. "I'm nothing like you, yet here you stand, ready to kill if necessary." James's smile was chilling. "Family traits run deep, sister. You can't escape what's in your blood," Sheriff Harmon interrupted. Before she could respond, "We need to get to Sheriff Blackwood. Porter, you're under arrest as an accessory to murder and attempted murder. James Daniels, you're—" The crash of breaking glass interrupted him as a small metal object sailed through the parlor window, landing with a clatter on the hardwood floor. "Down!" Sheriff Harmon shouted, recognizing the threat instantly. Sarah dove behind a sofa as the flashbang exploded, filling the room with blinding light and deafening sound. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the splintering of the front door, the pounding of multiple sets of boots. When her vision cleared, the parlor was filled with armed men, not lawmen, but hard-faced individuals in dusty trail clothes. At their center stood Charles Prescott, or rather, the man they had. Known as Charles Prescott. "Hello, James," he greeted coldly. "Surprised to see me alive?" James, still half-blinded by the flashbang, struggled to focus on the newcomer. "Wesley," he spat, "I should have known Harmon couldn't have killed the real Prescott." "The real Prescott has been dead for months," the man confirmed. "Convenient, taking his identity, allowed me to move in the right circles, establish the connections I needed." His gaze shifted to Sarah, who had maintained her grip on the Colt despite the explosion. "Miss Daniels, you've proven remarkably resilient." "Wesley Montgomery," Sheriff Harmon said, piecing it together as he kept his weapon trained on the intruders. "Richard Montgomery's nephew." Wesley inclined his head slightly. "Correct, Sheriff. The distant cousin in San Francisco that James E. and the real Prescott planned to impersonate to claim Elizabeth's inheritance." His smile was razor-sharp. "Unfortunately for them, I learned of their scheme months ago and decided to implement a counter-strategy." Sarah looked between the two men, her brother, and this new player in their deadly game. "You killed the real Prescott, took his identity." "Why?" "To save Elizabeth," Wesley replied simply. "My cousin was being manipulated by your brother. I tried to warn her, but she was too enamored to listen. So I eliminated Prescott and took his place, intending to expose James's true nature before the marriage." His expression darkened. "I was too late. By the time I arrived in Denver, they had already eloped." "So you arranged the massacre instead," Sheriff Harmon concluded. "Killed 7 people, including the cousin you claim to want to save." Wesley's face remained impassive. "An unfortunate miscalculation. My men were instructed to separate Elizabeth from the group, eliminate the others, and bring her safely to me. They panicked when she resisted." His cold gaze fixed on James. "Your sister was an unexpected complication. She tried to protect Elizabeth, but got caught in the crossfire." James laughed bitterly. "We're more alike than you'd admit, Wesley. Both are willing to kill for what they want." "The difference is motive," Wesley countered. "You wanted wealth. I wanted justice for my family." "And now?" Sheriff Harmon interrupted, acutely aware they were outnumbered. "What happens here?" Wesley gestured to his men. "James Daniels comes with us. He faces Montgomery justice for Elizabeth's death." He turned to Sarah. "You're free to go, Miss Daniels. Your only crime was trusting your brother." "This isn't how the law works," Sheriff Harmon objected. "Daniels needs to stand trial, not face a lynch mob." "In an ideal world, perhaps," Wesley agreed. "But we both know men like James have ways of escaping justice in the courts. Money opens many doors, silences many witnesses." His expression was unyielding. "He dies tonight, Sheriff. The only question is whether you and Miss Daniels join him." James tensed, desperation evident in his posture. "Sarah, help me. Whatever I've done, I'm still your brother." Sarah looked at him, truly looked at the man who had orchestrated so much death, including that of his own wife and unborn child. The brother she had loved existed only in memory now. "No," she said quietly. "My brother died the day he chose. Greed over humanity." She lowered her weapon slowly. "But that doesn't mean I accept vigilante justice either." Wesley raised an eyebrow. "You'd defend him? After everything?" "I defend the principle that separates us from men like him," Sarah replied, "the belief that justice comes from law, not personal vengeance." She turned to Sheriff Harmon. "Is there a way to ensure he faces a proper trial, one that can't be corrupted?" The sheriff considered for a moment. "Federal authorities in Washington have been investigating the Montgomery shipping business for months, suspected smuggling operations. If James is handed to them with the evidence we've gathered..." Wesley's expression remained cold, but something shifted in his eyes, a reluctant acknowledgement of her moral stand. Your brother wouldn't have shown such mercy. That's precisely the point, Sarah replied. A tense silence filled the room as Wesley weighed his options. Behind him, his men awaited orders, weapons still trained on James. 3 days, he finally said. You have 3 days to arrange a federal escort. If James Daniels isn't in custody by then, facing charges that will guarantee the gallows. He left the threat unspoken. Sheriff Harmon nodded grimly. I'll send the telegram tonight. As Wesley's men bound James for temporary imprisonment, Sarah watched her brother's face, saw the calculation still working behind his eyes, the refusal to accept defeat. He would escape if given the slightest opportunity, would rebuild his schemes from whatever resources remained to him. James must have sensed her scrutiny, for he met her gaze with a final, chilling smile. This isn't over, sister, he said softly. Some family bonds can never truly be broken. Sarah thought of Elizabeth, of the child that would never be born, of the Montgomerys in their shallow graves along the trail. She thought of her own fractured memory, still healing from the trauma her brother had inflicted. Goodbye, James, she replied, turning away as Wesley's men led him from the house. May God have mercy on you. The law certainly won't. 3 days passed in uneasy vigilance. Wesley Montgomery and his men kept James under guard in a remote hunting cabin outside Denver, while Sheriff Harmon worked tirelessly to arrange federal intervention. Sarah found herself in a strange limbo, her memory largely restored, but her future entirely uncertain. The telegrams confirmed, Sheriff Harmon announced on the morning of the 3rd day, finding Sarah in the parlor of the Daniels family home. Federal marshals arrive on this afternoon's train. They're taking James to Washington to face charges of conspiracy, fraud, and multiple counts of murder. Sarah nodded, relief mingling with a lingering sadness. Will they want me to testify? Eventually, yes. Your statement connecting James to the planning of the massacre will be crucial. The sheriff sat across from her, his weathered face showing concern. Are you prepared for that? To testify against my own brother? Sarah's gaze drifted to the family portrait above the fireplace. Her parents, James and herself, painted in happier times. I keep asking myself if there was a moment I could have changed this outcome, if I had recognized the darkness growing in him sooner. Some paths are chosen long before we see their direction, Sheriff Harmon said gently. Your brother made his choices. You can't take responsibility for them. Sarah appreciated his kindness, but knew the burden of family legacy was not so easily shed. James's final words to her about Daniel's ruthlessness in her blood had haunted her sleep these past nights. Have you decided what you'll do after? The sheriff asked, changing the subject. You're welcome to return to Willow Creek until the trial, if you'd prefer not to stay in Denver. The offer touched her. Willow Creek, where she had been a nameless woman with no past, now represented a strange sort of sanctuary, but Sarah knew running from her history would solve nothing. I need to face what's happened, she said firmly. All of it, including the Montgomery family's role in this tragedy. Sheriff Harmon raised an eyebrow. Meaning Wesley? He's as guilty as James in many ways. His intentions may have differed, but his methods were equally brutal. Sarah stood, moving to the window that overlooked the garden where she had played as a child. The cycle of vengeance between our families has claimed too many innocent lives. It needs to end. Before the sheriff could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Through the lace curtains, Sarah saw Wesley Montgomery, dismounting at the front gate, accompanied by 2 of his men. His expression was grim. He's early, Sheriff Harmon muttered, checking his pocket watch. The federal marshals won't arrive for hours yet. Sarah felt a chill of premonition. Something's wrong. Wesley didn't wait for an invitation, striding up the garden path and rapping sharply on the front door. When Sarah opened it, the strain on his face confirmed her fears. He's gone, Wesley stated without preamble. Your brother escaped during the night. Sheriff Harmon was instantly alert. How? Bribed one of my men. Cut through his restraints with a knife the traitor provided. Wesley's jaw tightened with barely controlled fury. The guard has paid for his mistake. James left him with a slit throat. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Another death laid at her brother's feet. Any indication where he's headed? The cabin was 8 miles northeast of the city. He could have gone in any direction, but my guess is he's making for the Western Rail line. Wesley's gaze was accusatory. I warned you Mercy was a mistake. Sheriff Harmon ignored the barb. We need to alert Denver's authorities, set up checkpoints at the stations. Already done, Wesley replied curtly. Sheriff Blackwood has men at every depot. But James is clever. He won't take obvious routes. No, Sarah agreed, a terrible clarity washing over her. He won't. She turned to Sheriff Harmon. But I know where he's going. The abandoned miner's cabin near Blackwater Ridge stood, as it had weeks before, when Sarah had first met Margaret Winters there. Its weathered walls held secrets, and she now believed James's emergency cache. You're certain about this? Sheriff Harmon asked as they approached on horseback, Wesley and 4 of his men following close behind. Sarah nodded. James always prepared for contingencies. After our father died, he established hidden supplies in various locations, money, weapons, documents. She gestured to the cabin. This place has significance. It's where the deed transferring Elizabeth's inheritance was signed. He'd consider it fitting. Wesley signaled his men to spread out, covering potential escape routes. If he's here, he won't surrender easily. No, Sarah agreed softly. He won't. They dismounted at a distance, approaching the cabin with caution. No smoke rose from the chimney. No horse was visible nearby. But Sarah felt her brother's presence with unsettling certainty. Sheriff Harmon drew his revolver. I'll go first. Miss Daniels, you stay back with— No, Sarah interrupted, the Colt from her father's hidden compartment now secured at her waist. This is between families. I need to face him. Wesley's expression darkened. If you're planning to help him escape, I've chosen my side. Sarah cut him off coldly. But I won't hide behind others while they risk their lives for my brother's crimes. After a tense moment, Sheriff Harmon nodded reluctantly. We'll be right behind you. First sign of trouble, we move in. Sarah approached the cabin alone, her heart hammering against her ribs. The door stood slightly ajar, an invitation, not carelessness. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. James sat at the rough wooden table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey before him, his revolver laid carefully. Within reach, he didn't look surprised to see her. Sister, he greeted, his voice hoarse, always the clever one. I knew you'd figure it out. Sarah remained in the doorway, where the others could still see her. It's over, James. Federal marshals are arriving. Today, every law enforcement officer in the territory is looking for you. Yet you found me first. He took another swallow of whiskey. Family instinct, perhaps. Or knowing how your mind works. Sarah studied him. The disheveled appearance, the fevered gleam in his eyes, so like their father's in his final days. Your wound is infected, isn't it? You're running a fever. James gave a humorless laugh. Observant as always. Yes, our friend Wesley's bullet did more damage than I let on. Ironic, isn't it? After everything, it's a piece of lead that might finish me. Come back with me, Sarah urged, taking a careful step inside. Surrender to the marshals. You'll receive medical treatment. Before they hang me? James shook his head. I think not. He tapped the revolver with his index finger. I have other plans for my final act. Sarah felt a surge of alarm. James, don't. Relax, sister. If I meant to end things now, I'd have done it before you arrived. He pushed the whiskey bottle toward her. Join me for a drink? For old times' sake. Sarah remained standing. There are no old times anymore, James. You destroyed them when you plotted to kill Elizabeth. Pain flashed across his features. Elizabeth, he murmured. "Did you know she looked at me the same way you are now? When she discovered the truth? That same mixture of horror and pity." "She loved you," Sarah said quietly. "Despite everything your father did to her family, she saw good in you. There was good in me once." James stared into his glass. "Before Montgomery ruined father, before I watched everything we built crumble beneath the weight of his influence." His gaze lifted. "To Sarah, you were too young to understand what it did to him, how it changed him." "I remember more than you think," Sarah countered. "I remember father's rages, his obsession with revenge, how it poisoned him from within." She took another step forward. "Just as it poisoned you." James's expression hardened. "Different perspectives on the same story. History is written by the victors, Sarah. Montgomery stole father's discovery, used his wealth and connections to cheat us of what was rightfully ours." He leaned forward, intensity burning through his fever. "Everything I did was to restore what was taken, to reclaim our legacy." "By becoming a murderer?" Sarah shook her head. "That's not legacy, James, it's damnation." For a moment, vulnerability cracked his facade. "Perhaps, but I wonder if you'd judge so harshly had I succeeded. If the wealth and power were now yours to enjoy, would principles matter quite so much?" The question struck uncomfortably close to Sarah's private fears. The Daniels' ruthlessness, James claimed, ran in her blood too. "We'll never know," she replied evenly, "because I choose a different path." James studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "You always were stronger than me, more like mother in that way." He pushed his chair back slightly. "There's a lockbox beneath the floorboards, the third plank from the wall. Inside you'll find legal documents, deeds to properties not connected, to my business dealings, clean assets that can't be seized. They're yours now." Sarah frowned. "I don't want your blood money, James." "It's not blood money," he corrected. "It's your inheritance. Father set it aside for you on your 16th birthday, made me promise to keep it separate from our other business." His smile was bitter. "One promise I actually kept." Outside, Sarah heard the shuffle of boots, sensing the others growing impatient. With the lengthy conversation, time was running out. "James," she said urgently, "come back with me. Face justice properly. Maybe with time, there is no time." He gestured to his side, where a dark stain had spread across his shirt. "Wesley's bullet found its mark better than anyone realized. I'll be dead by nightfall, with or without a doctor's intervention." Sarah moved closer, seeing now the grey, impala beneath his fever flush, the laboured rise and fall of his chest. "Let me help you." "You can," James said softly, "by answering one question truthfully." He met her gaze directly. "Do you hate me, Sarah, for everything I've done?" The question struck her core. She thought of Elizabeth's gentle smile, of the unborn child who would never draw breath, of the nightmares that still woke her screaming. Yet beneath her justified anger lay something more complex, the memory of a brother who had once protected her, taught her, loved her in his way. "I hate what you became," she answered honestly. "I hate the choices you made, but part of me will always love the brother I grew up with, the person you were before greed consumed you." James closed his eyes briefly, a tear escaping down his cheek. "Thank you for that small mercy." When he opened his eyes again, determination had replaced vulnerability. "Now go. Tell the others I'm alive but weakening, that I've agreed to surrender if they allow me a few hours to put my affairs in order." Sarah sensed deception. "What are you planning?" "Nothing that needs to concern you." James's hand moved subtly closer to his revolver. "You've chosen your path, sister. I've chosen mine. The difference is, mine ends today." Understanding dawned. "You intend to force them to kill you, to die rather than face the gallows." A more dignified end than I deserve, perhaps, James acknowledged, but one I prefer nonetheless. I won't help you commit suicide by lawman, Sarah said firmly. There's been enough death already. Then suggest an alternative, James challenged, because I will not spend my final hours in chains, paraded before a gawking public while infection eats away at me. Sarah considered for a long moment, then reached a decision that would haunt her for years to come. From her pocket, she withdrew a small glass vial. Laudanum, prescribed by Doc Wilson for her nightmares. A peaceful end, she offered quietly. On your own terms, but only if you give me something in return. James eyed the vial. What do you want? The truth. All of it. Written in your own hand. She indicated the paper and pen on the table. A full confession of your crimes, your partnership with Prescott, everything that led to the massacre. Sign it, and the laudanum is yours. A complex motion crossed James's face, respect mingled with resignation. Always negotiating from strength. Father would be proud. He reached for the pen. Very well. My final legacy to you, the truth, unvarnished and complete. For the next hour, James wrote steadily, pausing occasionally to gather his thoughts, or take a sip of whiskey. Sarah stood by the window, watching Sheriff Harmon and Wesley grow increasingly restless outside, signaling to them to wait just a little longer. When James finally set down the pen, the confession ran to several pages. It's all there, he said, sliding the papers across the table. Every sordid detail. It won't bring them back, but perhaps it will give you the closure you need. Sarah scanned the document quickly, confirming it contained what she had asked for. Among the revelations was a startling admission. James had initially loved Elizabeth. Genuinely. But when she'd discovered a letter detailing his arrangement with Prescott, his affection had twisted into something darker. He'd convinced himself that eliminating her was necessary, a sacrifice for the greater goal of reclaiming his family's position. And Elizabeth's inheritance, the shipping business? Sarah asked. With both Elizabeth and I dead, it reverts to her next of kin. James grimaced. Most likely Wesley, ironically enough. He'll get what he wants after all. Sarah folded the confession carefully, tucking it inside her dress. Then she placed the vial of laudanum on the table. There's enough here to ensure you won't wake. It will feel like drifting to sleep. James took the vial, studying it thoughtfully. You're giving me a cleaner death than I gave my victims. Another way you prove yourself a better person. This isn't mercy, James, Sarah replied, softly. It's pragmatism. Your death by shootout would only create another cycle of violence and retribution. This way it ends quietly. He nodded, understanding her reasoning. One last question, sister. After this is over, after I'm gone and the trials conclude, what will you do? Sarah had asked herself the same question countless times these past days. Begin again, she answered simply. Somewhere new, somewhere the Daniels name means nothing. Run from your legacy. James raised an eyebrow. Create my own, Sarah corrected, on foundations of truth and compassion, not vengeance and greed. James considered this, then raised his glass in a final salute. To new beginnings, then. May yours be happier than mine. He uncorked the vial. You should go now. Tell them I'll be out shortly to surrender. It will give me time. Sarah hesitated at the door. Goodbye, James. Her brother's smile held genuine warmth for the first time in years. Goodbye, little sister. Remember me as I was, not as I became. Outside, Sheriff Harmon and Wesley waited impatiently. Well? Wesley demanded. Is he surrendering? Sarah nodded, the confession secure against her heart. He's agreed to come out peacefully. He's just putting his affairs in order. Sheriff Harmon studied her face carefully, perhaps sensing what she had done, but asked no questions. We'll give him 10 more minutes, then we go in regardless. Those 10 minutes stretched into eternity for Sarah. When they finally approached the cabin and found James slumped peacefully at the table, an empty vial beside him, she felt not grief, but a complex release. The severing of bonds, both loving and toxic, the end of a chapter written in blood and betrayal. Wesley cursed, robbed of his vengeance. Sheriff Harmon merely sighed, holstering his weapon with the wisdom of a man who had seen too much death to mourn its gentler incarnations. "It's finished," he said quietly to Sarah. "All of it." But Sarah knew some things never truly end. The ripples of James's actions would continue long after his body was laid to rest. Montgomery and Daniels, two families destroyed by greed and vengeance, leaving her the sole survivor to carry both legacies. The weeks following James's death unfolded in a blur of legal proceedings. Federal authorities descended upon Denver, combing through the evidence Sarah provided: James's confession, the ledgers from the family home, correspondence between James and the real Charles Prescott. Wesley Montgomery faced his own legal troubles. While he hadn't orchestrated the massacre directly, his impersonation of Prescott and involvement in events afterward constituted serious crimes. But his connections and the fact that he could present himself as seeking justice for his murdered cousin resulted in a lenient sentence: 3 years in a comfortable minimum security facility. Before he was taken away, Wesley sought a final meeting with Sarah. "You could have let your brother die violently," he said, as they sat across from each other in Sheriff Blackwood's office. "It would have been a fitting end." "Violence only creates more violence," Sarah replied evenly. "I've seen enough to last several lifetimes." Wesley studied her with grudging respect. "The Montgomery-Daniels feud consumed 3 generations. My grandfather and your grandfather began as business partners before the first betrayal. Now you and I are the last ones standing." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "The feud ends with us." "Does it?" Wesley's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You have the Daniels inheritance, those clean assets your brother mentioned. I'll eventually have the Montgomery shipping interests. When I'm released, our paths may cross again. Not if I have any say in it," Sarah responded firmly. "Your inheritance is tainted with blood, so is mine. I plan to use whatever comes to me to make amends where possible." Wesley leaned back, genuinely surprised. "Amends? How exactly does one make amends for a massacre? By ensuring the victims aren't forgotten. By using those resources to help others, not for personal gain." Sarah stood, signaling the end of their conversation. "Goodbye, Wesley. I hope your time in prison gives you perspective on what truly matters." His cynical laugh followed her from the room. Daniel's passion for moral superiority. Some family traits do persist, it seems. The barb struck closer than Sarah cared to admit. The question of her own nature, how much of James's darkness might lurk within her, remained a persistent fear. 2 months after James's death, Sarah finally opened the lockbox he'd mentioned. As promised, it contained deeds to several properties across the Western Territories: a ranch in Wyoming, mining interests in Nevada, commercial buildings in San Francisco. All legally acquired, all in Sarah's name, established through a trust their father had created. The combined value was substantial. Not the fortune James had sought through his schemes, but enough to provide independence and opportunity. Along with the deeds was a letter from her father, written days before his death. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, I have passed from this world, and James has honored my request to keep these assets separate from our other ventures. While your brother inherited my business acumen, you inherited your mother's wisdom and compassion, qualities I came to value only after she was gone. The enclosed properties represent your independence. They are not entangled with the Montgomery dispute or any of my less savory business dealings. They are yours alone, to use as you see fit. My greatest regret is watching James follow my path of bitterness. I fear I taught him to value vengeance over happiness. Do not make the same mistake. Whatever becomes of our family's struggle with the Montgomerys, do not let it define your life as it has defined mine. With eternal love, your father. Sarah read the letter repeatedly, hearing her father's voice in the words. The man who had written this bore little resemblance to the bitter, raging figure of her childhood memories. Perhaps in his final days, Edward Daniels had glimpsed the destruction his obsession would wreak upon his children. Sheriff Harmon, who had remained in Denver to assist with the federal investigation, reviewed the deeds with her. Your father was cleverer than he seemed, he observed. These properties were acquired through separate corporations, different lawyers. Montgomery would never have connected them to your family. A contingency plan, Sarah said. Father always prepared for the worst. Wise man, in that respect at least. The sheriff hesitated. Have you decided what to do with them? Sarah had spent many nights contemplating this question. The properties represented both opportunity and burden, financial freedom, but tied to a legacy of conflict and resentment. I'm selling most of them, she said decisively. The proceeds will establish a foundation for orphaned children, those who've lost parents to violence or tragedy. She thought of Elizabeth's unborn child, of the lives shattered by her brother's actions. It feels appropriate. Sheriff Harmon nodded approvingly. And for yourself, will you return to Willow Creek? Sarah shook her head. There are too many ghosts in these territories. I've booked passage to London. A distant cousin of my mother's lives there. The only family connection untainted by the Montgomery-Daniels feud. Running away? The sheriff's. Her tone held no judgment, only concern. Starting fresh, Sarah corrected. There's nothing left for me here but painful memories and suspicion. In London, I can be simply Sarah, not the sister of James Daniels, not the woman found wandering after the Blackwater Ridge Massacre. You've earned that fresh start, Sheriff Harmon agreed, though Willow Creek will miss the woman we came to know as Beth. Sarah smiled at the memory of her first days in the small frontier town, when her identity had been a complete mystery, even to herself. Beth died when my memories returned. Perhaps that's for the best. Before her departure, Sarah made one final journey. She traveled to the site of the massacre, now marked with proper gravestones for each victim. The Montgomerys had been reburied in the family plot in Denver, but a memorial stone remained to mark where they had fallen. Standing before Elizabeth's marker, Sarah finally allowed herself to fully grieve, not just for her friend and sister by marriage, but for all that had been lost to greed and vengeance, the promising young woman whose kindness had briefly softened James's hardened heart, the unborn child who might have reconciled two feuding families, the lives cut short by the toxic blend of avarice and retribution. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, she whispered, placing fresh wildflowers at the base of the stone, but I promise your story won't be forgotten. As she turned to leave, Sarah noticed a figure on horseback watching from a distant ridge, a woman in dark riding clothes. For a moment she thought it might be Margaret Winters, somehow returned from the dead. But as the rider turned away, Sarah recognized the distinctive posture of Amelia Prescott, the real Charles Prescott's sister, who had come to Denver after news of the massacre became public. Another player in the tragedy, another life altered by its aftermath. Sarah wondered if Amelia knew the full truth about her brother's death, about Wesley's impersonation. But that was a question for another time, perhaps another lifetime. Today was for goodbyes, not new investigations. 6 months later, Sarah Daniels stood on the deck of a steamship bound for Europe, watching the American coastline recede into the distance. Behind her lay the federal trials that had exposed the full scope of James and Prescott's conspiracy, the recovery of the Montgomery family's assets, and her difficult reconciliation with the surviving relatives of those lost in the massacre. The locket that had once belonged to Elizabeth remained around her neck, no longer a burden of mistaken identity, but a solemn remembrance of lives cut short by ambition and revenge. From her valise, Sarah withdrew a letter received just before her departure. A brief note from Sheriff Thomas Harmon. Miss Daniels, word reached Willow Creek of your imminent departure for London. I trust this letter finds you well and at peace with your decision to seek new horizons. I sometimes think of that day when Eli Jenkins brought a young woman with no memory to our small town. Who could have imagined the truth that would eventually emerge? Yet through darkness, you found your way back to light, not the person you were before, perhaps, but someone stronger for having faced the shadows within your own family. The cabin at Blackwater Ridge has been dismantled, its secrets buried with the past. Sometimes that's the only way forward, to acknowledge what happened, but refuse to let it define what comes next. May your journey bring you the fresh start you seek. Remember that Willow Creek will always welcome you should you ever wish to return. With highest regard, Thomas Harmon. Sarah folded the letter carefully, returning it to her valise. The sheriff was right. The journey forward required acknowledging the past without being imprisoned by it. James had chosen to chain himself to vengeance, allowing it to corrupt everything he touched. She would make a different choice. As the coastline vanished into the horizon, Sarah removed Elizabeth's locket from around her neck. For a moment, she held it in her palm, feeling its weight one last time. Then, with a single fluid motion, she cast it into the depths of the Atlantic. Not to forget, but to release. Not to deny her family's darkness, but to step into her own light. The silver locket disappeared beneath the waves, carrying with it the final physical reminder of the Wagon Massacre and its aftermath. Sarah Daniels turned her face toward Europe, toward a future unburdened by false identities and family vendettas. Behind her, America receded, a land of opportunity and brutality, of new beginnings and tragic endings. Before her stretched the unknown, frightening in its vastness but exhilarating in its possibilities. For the first time since waking with no memory on that blood-soaked trail, Sarah felt truly free. Not because she had forgotten, but because she had remembered everything and chosen to write a different story. 15 years later, a well-dressed woman walked through the streets of London, her golden hair now threaded with silver, her blue eyes carrying the wisdom of difficult experience. Sarah Daniels, now Sarah Barrett, following her marriage to a kind British physician, had built the life she'd once thought impossible. The Daniels Foundation for Orphaned Children had grown from her initial investment, now operating homes across America and expanding into Europe. Her husband, Dr. William Barrett, had been instrumental in establishing medical care for the Foundation's charges. On this particular spring morning, Sarah was visiting the newest London home, a stately building converted from an old manor house. As she toured the facilities, a newspaper caught her attention. The headline announced the death of Wesley Montgomery, who recently returned to America after serving his sentence and rebuilding the Montgomery shipping empire. The article mentioned his complicated legacy and controversial business practices, diplomatic language for a man who had never truly abandoned his ruthless approach to commerce. What it didn't mention was his connection to the Blackwater Ridge massacre, that history had been carefully buried through financial influence and the passage of time. Sarah set the paper aside, feeling a strange sense of closure. With Wesley's death, The primary architects of the tragedy that had defined her early life were all gone. James, Prescott, Wesley, each had pursued wealth and power, each had employed violence to achieve their ends, and each had ultimately failed to find peace. Mrs. Barrett, a young woman approached, clipboard in hand. The children are ready for their reading lesson, if you'd like to join them. Sarah smiled, leaving the newspaper and its ghosts behind. I'd be delighted. In the bright, airy classroom, 24 children gathered around as Sarah opened a book of frontier tales. As she began to read, she noticed a girl of about 10 watching her intently with keen blue eyes that seemed strangely familiar. "What's your name?" Sarah asked during a pause in the reading. "Elizabeth," the child answered shyly. "I was named after my grandmother." Sarah felt an unexpected chill. "And your last name?" "Montgomery, ma'am." The girl straightened proudly. "My father says we come from an important American family." Time seemed to freeze as Sarah processed this. Revelation. Elizabeth Montgomery, a name that had haunted her for 15 years, now reborn in this child. Was it possible? Could this girl be a descendant of some distant branch of the Montgomery family? "Your grandmother was named Elizabeth?" Sarah asked carefully. The girl nodded. "She died before I was born, in America. My father doesn't talk about it much, says it makes him too sad." Later, after the reading lesson, Sarah discreetly inquired about the child's background. Elizabeth Montgomery had arrived at the home 3 months earlier after her father's death from consumption. Her mother had passed years before. No other family had come forward to claim her. That evening, Sarah discussed the situation with her husband. "It can't be a coincidence," she insisted. "The name, the age, the connection to America, there must be a link to the Montgomerys I knew." Dr. Barrett, ever practical, urged caution. "Even if she is connected to that family, what would it mean?" "The feud ended 15 years ago, Sarah. You've built a new life." "I know," Sarah agreed, gazing out at the London skyline from their townhouse window. "But I can't help feeling this child has been placed in my path for a reason. As if the story isn't quite finished." The next day, Sarah returned to the orphanage with a decision. The paperwork would take time. The process would be complicated, but her mind was made up. Elizabeth Montgomery would not grow up without family and would not be defined by the tragic history of her bloodline. As Sarah signed the initial adoption inquiry forms, she thought of her brother's final words about family traits running deep. Perhaps he had been right, but not in the way he intended. The capacity for compassion could be as inherent as the tendency toward vengeance. It was always a matter of choice, of which seeds one chose to nurture. Elizabeth Montgomery would have that choice. She would know her history, the full, complicated truth of it, but would not be imprisoned by it. And perhaps, in the raising of this child, the final chapter of the Montgomery Daniels saga could be written not in blood, but in reconciliation. When Sarah extended her hand to the girl that afternoon, inviting her for a walk through the garden, she felt the weight of the past lifting further with each step. The Locket might rest at the bottom of the Atlantic, but its story continued. Transformed, redeemed, and ultimately transcended. "Would you like to hear a story about America?" "Sarah," asked the child as they strolled among the spring blooms. "About brave women and difficult choices, about remembering and forgetting, and about how sometimes the most important journey is the one that leads us home?" Elizabeth's eyes brightened with interest. "Is it a true story?" Sarah smiled, squeezing the small hand in hers. "Yes," she answered softly, "every word of it." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.